Welcome to the Crit House, everybody. I'm Jeff Larson, and that was the work of Pam Fricke and her work in Cuba. And we'll talk to her in just a second, but I want to introduce our esteemed reviewers here today. Edward Boches is a documentary and a street photographer. He has in the past been a college professor, a chief creative and innovation officer at Mullen. And he has also at some point in time been a speechwriter, a reporter, an editor. And I call him the man of 1,000 projects because he has a lot going on. Edward, thanks for joining us here on the Crit House.
Great to be back.
Erin Carey is a curator and an educator, and she is an artist in her own right. She is the former academic director and gallery director at the New England School of Photography. She's a regular at portfolio reviews. She is often a juror, and she is currently on the board of directors at the Griffin Museum of Photography in the Boston area. And she's my landscape mentor because I took a class from her at the Griffin recently. Pam Fricke is here with us, and she is the work that we have just looked at and we'll be seeing throughout the show today. She is a middle school Spanish teacher in the 34th and final year of teaching. Congratulations on that, Pam. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
You noted, too, that you have been chosen several times for exhibitions with women street photographers. So congratulations on that as well.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your work.
Like you said, I'm a middle school Spanish teacher, and I live in upstate New York. My work is, what you're seeing is a collection of pictures that I have taken in Cuba. First, let me thank both Edward and Erin and you, Jeff, for taking a look at my photos and even taking the time to talk to me about them. These photos are pictures I took in August of this year in Cuba. I have always liked photography, but it was in 2018 when I took my first trip to Cuba, which was kind of doubling as my Spanish teacher wanting to go there and the photographer and me go there. It was then that I really kind of developed a love for street photography. So the pictures that you're seeing here are pictures that I took that I'm hoping that will evoke some kind of emotion, either in the person looking at them or the people in the photos, or have some sort of a connection, but also are, pleasing to look at, and that maybe make somebody wonder what's going on in the picture or what the story is behind the photograph.
Well, they're really good images to look at. I love the framing. I love the interactions you're having with folks here. But let me turn it over to our esteemed panel. Erin, tell us, you've seen the images, you've thought about them a little bit. What do you think? What's your reaction? What are your comments? Your initial comments?
Well, thanks for having me. My first impression of the work when I looked at it was that this photographer has a really strong sense of moment. And I think when people work on the street, that's a place where people can struggle actually a lot, because there's a lot of there's such an important part of rhythm and the dance and getting used to the interaction with people moving. And then there's the element of composition. And so they're strong compositionally, but I think your innate connection to subject is really quite strong. And that was the thing I noticed the most, was that there's a tenderness, the way that you address your subjects. And it also appears to me, given that I think you said that it started going in 2016 or 17, but have you been multiple times to this place?
Yeah, this past summer was my 7th trip.
7th. See, so and I think that's part of it, is that you're creating a relationship with a place that you love, that you're curious about, and that's also palpable in the images. And so what happens here is that you can see the subjects are letting you in. And part of that subject volume, part of that is gaze, but you're also showing us subjects that are not necessarily a stereotypical tourist pictures. So I see you going beyond. So this creative relationship over time, I think, is also very palpable in the work. So that was my first impression of the project. I don't know if I should pause and invite Edward in.
Yeah, let's let Edward put his 2 cents in here.
Yeah. So first of all, I think you have an overall really nice body of work, and I like the fact that you're working wide, which is both wonderful for what you want to accomplish, also of course challenging. You do have multiple things going on in your frames, which is good, and you have stories, and you also have some ambiguity. So, and I love that ambiguity. So, for example, the kid with the balloon. I mean, that's really an interestingly done photograph, and it also begs the question of like, well, where is everybody else, and why is he playing, you know, all alone? So I thought that was sort of. Oh, well, this one I liked because there's the frame within the frame. I thought was a really sort of like interesting layering in the visual. I actually maybe a little different from Erin. I sort of wish she weren't quite as aware of you and the camera as he is, but I think that works really well. And I love the two dogs. The way that you've got the second smaller dog positioned, it's the next image, positioned underneath the body of the first dog is rather amusing, because it's almost as if he's saying, well, what's going on here? How come no one's paying attention to me? I also love the woman on the bus with a kid in the corner. So, because I think there's huge emotion in there, and you wonder what is it that she's thinking about, what happened, why this pensive moment, and then you have just the kid in the corner who's recognized.
This felt when I saw it as like the Robert Frank elevator operator image.
Yeah,
it's just that sort of moment of ennui.
So from I guess what I think I'd love to see you do is, I think in some cases you have your form. By form, I mean your composition and all the elements are terrific, but the content isn't quite as interesting as you might want it to be. And in other cases, you have really, really interesting content, and the form might be like, to me, it's off like the littlest bit. So I think you're doing everything right. You just pay even like a little bit more attention. If you've ever heard of Jeff Dwyer, who's written a lot about photography and has a wonderful book where he dissects every individual Gary Winogrand photograph and talks about how and why they work at these individual levels. That would be really useful to you based on the kind of work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. See, this one was a little bit more Bill Burke for me. It was kind of interesting to see when I thought about the totality of what you submitted. It seemed like you spanned the gamut in terms of reference. And I don't mean that you were attempting to imitate or emulate other people. At times we saw humor. Other times, you know, we saw like this deeply active thing where they forget about you. So I thought that was kind of it. Like this one, for example, I loved, and like the gun is interesting. It's playful at the same time. Like there's an element of edge to it. I love that he's turned to you. Like the sculptural aspect of what happens in that elbow is really meaningful in terms of activating the viewer here in the foreground. And I also felt like this was a unique one as I was going through your work. I thought like, oh, this one's kind of an interesting throw-in in the middle of all these other pictures, which feel a little bit more lighthearted. And if we really dig in here, we see it's a game, but it doesn't feel like a game. And I think that's interesting, right? Because there's like what's being communicated, and then there's the implication of something bigger. And I think like if you start to add up what's happening across all of your images, I think you're saying like it's beyond beauty and it's beyond bright, but there's an edge here. Like this one, for example, thank you, Jeff, for picking this one out. You know, like there's a moment where it's like it's lighthearted, kids are playing, life is happening, and then I'm like, oh, but then she's throwing in the gun, and then she's also letting us see a person have a really private moment in the middle of like public, in the middle of a street, you know. And so like that push and pull of the layering of the street, I think is good, and I think it's on its way to where it should be. In that regard, you know, I keep thinking, I always think about Magnum, right? And like we think about the three things, or the triangle of things that happen in terms of the foreground, midplane, and background, and this idea of how are they correlated? This guy in the front, right, and he's got the heart, and then we have this you know, so there's different ages of gentlemen, right? This older, sort of mid-aged, then younger age, and so they move kind of in this way. They relate to each other. They push and pull. There's beauty and there's sadness at the same time. And I think like that sadness, and then like looking at the playfulness, but then the potential implied violence or a history regarding the gun says something different as once we jump over, for example, to like the girl walking down the street, right? And that beautiful shadow, and there's light on her legs. You know, it's kind of that Mark Cohen moment. And you're like, yeah, like look at her shoes. There's delight. I love that I can't see her face, but then I see something else happening. The hands are repeated. So like you're giving us a really like wide breadth of emotional experience. So I want to say, I think that's interesting.
So but on these two same photographs for a second, the thing that I love about this is you have a sense that she isn't young from her body and her arms, but then the shape of her face and her head on the shadow makes her seem like a totally different person. And I love that sort of odd tension and juxtaposition. If you go back to 20 for a minute, because this is perhaps my my favorite photograph, although it for me it's not exactly perfect, and it goes back to what I was talking about with getting both the form and the content, which again it's rare, and I never achieve it, but it's worth pursuing anyway. So I love the stories going on here. What I wish you were back a tiny bit so that I saw the rest of his left hand, which would also open up that heart and the Dolce Gabbana a little bit, and also give me a little bit more of the kid in the lower left, because right now you have 2.5 stories going on. You have the man in the foreground, who actually may not be the most important subject in the picture. It may be the kid who's bent over for whatever reason, tired, sad, whatever. But then you have clearly a relationship between the two boys on the left, which I think gets lost just a little bit by missing, you know, the full catch of that. And that's sort of what I'm encouraging you just to think about a little bit more, is can you get the content and the form both perfect? You'll do it 1 out of 100 times, but it's still just worth thinking about as you create images.
Yeah,
You know,
that's really useful.
and I want to echo, I'm totally with Edward on that. This is a moment where like that getting cut off on that edge, that like it's a hug that's a little too tight, and he is meaningful to the content dialogue. So shifting a little bit to the left, you know, like what did the cars add? If you think about, right, like using the entirety of the space or the street, you know, it does add like street environment. At the same time, like does it really complete the content level that you're looking for? Probably no. So that shift down into the left is probably a really smart move.
If you're good enough to notice that all when you're taking the photograph, I commend you, because I never can see that much until after the fact.
No, I think it was just like I came upon it and was walking towards them and just snapped it. I don't think there was a lot of time to think about what I was doing, really, other than
one of the small point I'll make is one of the reasons this is really, really interesting is he's not looking at you, and therefore you wonder what he is looking at, you know, off to the side, which is not the same thing that the other boy is looking at, because he's looking down at the other boy on the left, which sort of relates a little bit to my content of the man framed in the bicycle thing. I would gladly have this picture in my portfolio.
It is well done, and I have to say it's one of those images that you keep, and I see this in a lot of your images, that you can spend time and keep discovering more things in them than you first think that is the main point of the subject. And I think Edward's point about the shadow looking like a little girl and the actual woman looking older is an interesting point as well.
She was an older woman.
Yeah. Erin, what else? What else? So Pam is coming toward retirement, and she is looking to sort of take on the next step. What are your thoughts for what she can do to grow her photography as she moves to her next phase?
Oh, interesting. Oh, I'm not allowed to take a pass on live TV, so.
I'm going to be retiring, and I'm going to have right now it's just go on school vacations to these places. My town is so small, there's not a whole lot to photograph, so I travel and take pictures. But I'm gonna retire at the end of this school year, and I'll have all the time in the world to work on it. And I'm not sure exactly what I should be working on or what my next step is in this progression.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I want to say to you, I mean, congratulations for retiring. That's exciting. At the same time, right? Like so far, your photographic process has been related to travel, and it sounds like what you're saying is you look forward to, so you build up an expectation and an excitement, but it's located in a very specific time of year, and it's always event or location or travel oriented. So I think one of the things that I think's exciting for you is that you're going to be able to delve into an everyday practice. And that is going to dramatically change what you're looking at. And don't let that throw you, right? Because it looks like, for example, right now, I mean, you're taking yourself out of your environment. So therefore it is foreign to you. There's an inherent archaeological discovery when you put yourself someplace new. So I think like one of the challenges is always like the everyday, not to say that you should become a different photographer or a domesticated, a photographer of the domestic, but there is a moment where it's like, oh, wow, like, don't be so concerned or worried if right away you get there and you're like, my pictures look boring compared to all the work I did, because once a year you built up to a huge travel trip. I feel like that may happen to you, and like, don't worry about it. But I would love to see you really push through the challenges of a regular practice and what that really means. Because some of the little things that, that Edward is talking about, regarding the form meeting the content, by way of repetition, like in terms of your practice, that will come to you naturally. We don't want to think about photography like throwing a baseball, but it is not like throwing a baseball. If you want to become a pitcher, you will go into your backyard as, at whatever age, but as a kid, and you'll throw 1,000 balls every day till you're exhausted. And yet somehow so many people hold photography in this esteem where it's like, it's precious, and I think about it and I do this, and I hear that language all the time. And also, no, like, go throw 1,000 baseballs every day. And when you do that, something magical is going to happen for you. I mean, you already have the bones, right? So
I love what Erin's saying, Pam, because I think as I listen to both to you and your plans, and then to what Erin's saying, I'm sorry. It sounds as if you're often thinking about photography as there's a destination and you're going to photograph that destination. I think there's actually a concern with that these days, which is we as Americans are really no longer entitled to go document other parts of the world as documentary photographers. So all we really can do is grab some vacation, kinds of snapshots, because it's just become so politically incorrect. But the other part of that is agreeing with what Erin's saying is what the advice that I would have to you is you never go anywhere ever without a camera. Your camera is with you all the time. Your whatever camera you choose to use doesn't, and I don't mean your iPhone necessarily. And you will over time start to see many more opportunities within what might seem overly familiar to you. Like right now, you're so excited when you travel because everything's new and it's different and it's not what you see every day. But as you get better at taking images of what you do see every day, two things will happen. One, you'll see them very differently than you used to, and they'll become a better photographer when you do go to those destinations.
Well, I think that's a really good point. And Pam, Edward was in your position not too long ago as a retiring educator who has moved on to sort of take on a photographic practice. And one of the things that I think that he does so extraordinarily well is he finds projects in the place that he is, and he focuses on those things, and he tells stories. And I know you're in a very small town, but I can't help but think that there must be stories to be told there from some perspective or somewhere in that vicinity. It's certainly a beautiful area, in upstate, that sort of corner where Vermont and Massachusetts and New York come together. So have you thought about doing projects like in the area where you're living and spending more time doing non-travel pieces?
Yeah, I have thought. I have a couple of ideas. I just find it, I mean, it's such a small town, and I've taught thousands of kids and their parents, and it's I mean, people know me, and I feel like sometimes it's easier to photograph where people don't know who you are or what you're doing than when somebody that sees you with a camera on the street and then wants to come up and talk to you. You know what I mean? It's like, for some reason, I feel like it's easier to be unobtrusive when nobody knows you than when everybody knows you.
Well,
but I guess also if people know you, they are more inclined to let you have access or into homes or whatever too. But
yeah, I mean, that's the big challenge is access, right?
Yeah.
And you should be able to get that access. Sorry,
Yeah.
Edward, go ahead.
I was going to say, you should give yourself that as a challenge. That's sort of interesting because do you know who Martin Parr is? Have you ever looked at Martin Parr's work? I mean,
yeah.
because he actually became that kind of character in the towns where he photographed. He would move there and stay there and live there for extended periods of time, and ended up, you know, really knowing everybody. But he found, as a result of that commitment, he found these odd, quirky ways of looking at that world around him. So I don't think it should be one or the other at all. I just think it's an opportunity for you to maybe see that place a little bit differently than what you think it is already, and to heighten your skills as you continue to become a photographer full-time.
And Erin, you have some experience with that, going back to the same place again and again in a small town.
I do. And actually, I was going to say to you, I think that a small town is ripe with content. And I just think like a place that you know deeply well. And yes, there are challenges to that. But I think like that just means that you understand it in a way other people cannot. And so your vision, your history, your memories, this idea of creating a relationship to a place, I think has been an important dialogue in art for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think photography, when it really like at its inception, and once we got through pictorialism right in the beginning, and that large format camera, and once we get to the sort of mobile like 35mm camera, allows us that opportunity. It's like you can create relationship to a place, and it's one of the things that photography's done, I think probably the best in the last 100 years. So I think like that's really important, and it's related to literature, it's related to narrative, it's related to history, right? Like it's all of those things. But, you know, a place where everything and nothing happens all the time is potentially so much more interesting than someplace exotic. I would love to see your town.
It's challenging by definition, because you're going to point your camera and the frame may not automatically be as filled with everything that is in your frame when you're in Cuba on the streets by definition. But you know, there's been amazing photographs taken in a tiny little diner, or in the supermarket, or in the checkout line, or in a waiting room at the doctor's office, or, you know, it's still a really good exercise for you. And I'm a big believer that you take the pictures first, and then you let them talk to you, and they'll tell you if you have a project and what that project might be. And you'll be surprised what you discover when you do that.
I'm 100% Edward.
So great discussion about the work, and it's and Pam, I think you have just a lovely body of work here. I can see from your vision and how you compose and framing and putting images within the frames that you've got a tremendous eye for detail and for what you're able to see while you're shooting, which is impressive on the street, because not a lot of people have that when I see it. But so I'm going to allow for folks to have just their last thoughts. Edward, let's start with you. What is the most important thing that you think Pam should think about as she moves into her next phase of photography?
I think it should maybe to get over that perception you have that where you live may not be either that interesting, or it may be too familiar to you, and therefore just force yourself to do something. Go literally stand in one place and take a picture from every different angle, perspective, up, down, you know, turn around, but don't move your feet other than in that circle, and just find little exercises like that actually help you see what feels too familiar in new ways. And I think it'll open your eyes even more.
Erin Carey, same to you.
Thanks. You know what? I'm not sure that writing has been important to you, but I always encourage my students, my friends, my colleagues, those who make art, regardless of photography or another medium. I think that writing is a really important practice that really goes hand in hand, especially with photography. And if you belong to a place and you feel like you already know about it, or being able to ask yourself a question and then giving yourself a limited period of time to like call an answer to yourself about your motivations, perhaps your memories, your desires, your dreams. I think those little things might be meaningful and helpful to you in the challenge of a place that you know. And then also be unapologetic and be greedy. You know, now is the time for your photography. So like do that.
Hey, I have a question for you, Pam. Do you have a crit group? Are you in a crit group?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, that's something to think about. And it's possible, even from, I don't want to put Jeff on the spot, but from all the people who've come through this show who may not have crit groups, that in this day and age of Zoom, we don't have to be in the same place. Crit groups will be remarkably helpful for you, just because you'll be able to show work that's not anywhere near finished. It's work in progress. Get feedback, ideally from people whose opinions you respect, who become familiar with what you're trying to do, and vice versa. And maybe something to think about. I think the interesting thing is none of us know without the help of others if our images are any good.
Yeah, I do have a couple photographer friends that that I bounce ideas off and show them photos, so that's very helpful. So
it is very helpful. And I'll just reiterate what Edward was saying, is just having the ability to have a regular meeting where in 4 weeks that you're going to see some people who are going to tell you something. It does a couple of things. It forces you to get out there and work, because you want to show something, but also you want to show something good. And the education you get from the input from people from varied places is it's fantastic. So if you have the opportunity to find some people and form it yourself, I mean, Edward, you've done that at least once, I know.
Not to mention, Jeff, too, is that like, I'm sorry, I need to jump right in on you, but
no, please.
the other thing too is that another part of your education that's really truly invaluable from that crit process is that you learn as much, if not more, by looking at other people's decision makings. That's really meaningful. So you don't always have to worry about being on the hot seat, but just showing up and committing to that and caring and learning the language to talk about photography, and then seeing the choices other people make and engaging in a dialogue with them we will shed light on your own practice.
Yeah.
And what's really fascinating about that is in my 2 crit groups, I will often see work from people who are working, they're not doing anything at all that relates immediately to what I might be doing, but there's something in their work that I realize, oh, I can apply that way of thinking or looking or seeing to what I'm doing, and it would give it a new angle perspective without copying what they're doing. So yeah, I think it's a terrific idea.
And that's exactly why we're here on the Crit House, is to try to make that opportunity available, so that people who don't have people and groups to talk to, they can see how the conversation takes place when smart folks come together to talk about photography. So Pam, thanks so much for showing your images. It is always hard to put yourself out there, especially, and it's hard to do in a crit group because you're talking to people who you care about, but also now you're showing yourself out there to the world as well to see. Hopefully this is helpful to you. And I do want to say that if you are out there watching and you are interested in showing your work and having a discussion like Pam has done here, you can register on thecrithouse.com, and we can consider and have a group come in and talk about your work as well. And I would also like to encourage all of those people out there watching to subscribe to the Crit House as well. Thank you all for watching the Crit House.
Thank you.
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Can't wait to see what you do,
everybody.
Pam.